There are people you leave feeling smaller than when you arrived, not because they're obviously cruel, not because something dramatic happened, just that somewhere in the middle of the conversation, you stopped being fully yourself. Your opinions got quieter, your certainty disappeared. And whatever version of you walked in that door was no longer the one handling things by the time you left. And the unsettling part is this: you didn't decide to do that. You didn't choose to shrink. It happened before you noticed it was happening. Psychology has a specific explanation for why certain people trigger this response in you, and none of it is about weakness. It is about something your brain built long before you met the person you're thinking of right now. Here are 8 hidden reasons why you lose yourself around certain people. Reason 1. Your nervous system mirrors theirs instead of staying regulated. The human brain contains a system of neurons that causes you to unconsciously synchronize with the emotional and physiological state of people around you. When someone near you is calm, your system tends toward calm. When someone near you carries high emotional intensity, dominance, urgency, distress, control, your nervous system can shift toward their frequency before your conscious mind has processed what is happening. Neuroscience identifies this as social regulation, and in most environments it is useful. But around people with high emotional intensity, it can mean that you enter a conversation as yourself and exit as an adaptation of their state. Reason 2. You were conditioned, at some point, to earn your place in relationships, like this one. This isn't about the specific person. It is about the template. If at some point in your development you were in a relationship with a parent, a sibling, an early caregiver where your value was conditional on your behavior, your agreeableness, your performance, your brain built a template for that relational dynamic. When a current relationship activates enough of those variables, a similar emotional tone, a similar power differential, a similar need for approval, the template fires. You don't choose to perform. The performance was the survival strategy your brain learned. It runs automatically. Reason 3. Their certainty overrides your signal. Around certain people, your internal sense of what you think, want, or feel gets drowned out not by argument, but by the sheer certainty in their voice. Cognitive psychology has identified a phenomenon where high-confidence expression functions as social proof. Your brain reads their certainty as evidence of correctness, even when you had a different reading of the situation. You walk in knowing what you think. They speak with absolute conviction. And somewhere in the middle, you start wondering whether your read was actually right. This isn't weakness. It is a documented pattern in how the social brain weighs information. Reason 4. You learned early that disagreement meant losing the connection. For many people who lose themselves around specific individuals, there is a core learning from early in life. Disagreement is dangerous. Not intellectually dangerous, relationally dangerous. Something in you learned, in a specific environment, that asserting a different view created distance, tension, or rupture in a connection that mattered. That learning doesn't disappear when the original relationship ends. It travels. It waits for a relationship that feels similar enough, and then it runs the old instruction: agree, defer, minimize, or risk losing something essential. Here's where it gets important to sit with this for a moment. Because if 4 of these 8 reasons have already felt familiar, if there's a specific face coming up as you read, then what comes next explains the mechanism most people never reach. Reason 5. The relationship activates a template your brain built before you had language. The earliest relational experiences leave marks on the nervous system before conscious memory is possible. Neuroscience has found that implicit memory, the kind of memory that shapes emotional and behavioral responses, is encoded earlier and differently than explicit narrative memory. This means that some relationships trigger a response not because of anything you consciously remember, but because the felt experience of being near that person matches a pattern your body learned before you had words. You can't reason your way out of it because the trigger is not in the part of your brain that reasons. Reason 6. You suppress the parts of yourself that feel incompatible automatically. Around certain people, the version of you that has strong opinions, different preferences, or specific needs goes quiet. Not because you consciously decide to hide it, because your nervous system learned in relationships with a similar emotional signature, that expressing those parts created problems. The suppression became automatic. What you experience as losing yourself is often the activation of a suppression pattern that has been running for a long time, one that feels like self-erasure, but is actually a conditioned response to a perceived threat. Reason 7. You confuse their emotional intensity for the truth about you. When someone near you expresses a strong reaction to who you are, frustration, disappointment, judgment, it can feel like information, like a mirror, like a signal about who you actually are. Research in social psychology suggests that people with certain relational histories are more susceptible to this dynamic, where another person's strong emotional reaction functions like a verdict rather than a data point. You walk in knowing yourself. You leave with their assessment layered over your own, and the two feel indistinguishable for a while. Reason 8. Being yourself once had a real cost in relationships like this one, and your brain remembers. This is the core reason underneath all the others. Somewhere, in some relationship that mattered, being fully yourself, having your own opinions, your own wants, your own boundaries, cost you something. The relationship, the approval, the stability, the safety. Your brain did what brains do with costly outcomes. It built an avoidance system. Around people who carry enough of the same variables, that system activates. The self-erasure isn't weakness. It is a memory encoded in the body of what happened the last time you showed up fully. Here is what connects all 8 reasons. None of them are permanent, and none of them are who you are. They are adaptive patterns, responses built by a brain that was doing its best with what it had. The self that seems to disappear around certain people isn't gone, it is protected. It went quiet, because quiet was once the safest option. Understanding the mechanism doesn't instantly change the response, but it changes what the response means, and that is not a small thing. Because there is a difference between a self that is absent and a self that has learned to wait. You are not the version of yourself that disappears. You are the one who notices it happening.